morning again. I'm Natalie Doan, Vice President of University Advancement and also a 2003 alumna of Ohio Wesleyan. Thank you for joining us for WOW 2020 and our session on Leading by Influence, knowing your value and elevating your voice to deliver an impactful and memorable presence. I'm looking forward to a really dynamic conversation with 4 women who will share their thoughts on what it means to lead by influence and why it is such an important leadership trait to hone. On the panel this morning, we have Amy Kimball, class of 2005, CEO of Boston VA Research Institute, Racquel Mason, a current parent of a student who will graduate in 2023, and Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for Elanco Animal Health, Julie Tutkovics, class of 92, Chief Marketing and Communications Officer for Huntington National Bank, and Hilary Quinn, class of 2019, Equity Capital Markets Analyst for Morgan Stanley. Our panelists are really eager to answer questions and engage in meaningful conversation this morning. So we encourage you all to use the chat function, or you're welcome to unmute yourself to ask a question this morning. So don't be shy. When you're not speaking, we do remind you to just keep yourself on mute to keep the distractions limited. I also want to just share that this session will be recorded this morning. So again, feel free to jump in as we go through the session. We're going to kick things off this morning with each panelist introducing themselves and sharing a little bit about why they're passionate about leading through influence. And so I think Amy is actually going to kick things off for us this morning. Amy?
All right. Thanks, Natalie. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me today. So this topic for me is very important because honestly, this is the topic that changed my life. So I wanted to share my story with you today. And my story is marked by struggle, but also by redemption. So it started when I was in school. My difficulties in school started when I was 7. And it went on for all of my formative years, the next probably 12 years. I was inconsistent in my ability to perform in school. I would sometimes get A's, I would sometimes get F's, anywhere in between. And everybody told me I was smart, but nobody could figure out why I couldn't perform. So it kind of just came down to, you're not trying hard enough. You need to apply yourself. The more I tried, the harder it was for me. So while I was trying hard and struggling and failing in school, I poured a lot of energy into work. I started working when I was 8. I got a job at a barn. It was hard, manual labor. It was hot, smelly, sticky, and tiresome. But I kind of loved it because I was a doer. And for me to be able to go into a barn and get things done and see the fruits of my labor immediately was incredibly satisfying, unlike in school. So I did this for about 10 years and I really, developed that work ethic, that hard work and grit. Following that, I wanted to find an outlet for my more creative side. And I, again, sort of applied that passion and grit and energy by going to every flower shop in the surrounding area and asking if they would take a chance on me and hire me. The last one finally did, and I quickly excelled in that environment, both creatively, but also in the business. And so the owner, who had a young daughter, soon after I started, actually allowed me to run her shop one summer as a high school student so that she could spend time with her daughter. I loved it. It was my passion. It was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. My dream was maybe to someday open my own flower shop, but people in my life had other plans for me, and that included college. I didn't think I was college material. I had struggled so much with my grades, who would accept me? But my guidance counselor in high school decided to invest in me. He pulled me out of class once a week, which I loved because he pulled me out of class once a week to just talk with me about my future. And my only criteria for college were that I wanted to get out of the area, get away from people I knew and carve my own path and, really set my own future, try something new. So he introduced me to colleges that change lives and to owu. And I can still remember and just feel that magical feeling that I got when I first set foot on campus. And I think we all sort of felt that and know what I'm talking about. owu invested in me. It was amazing. I was accepted. They saw me, I think, as a whole person and my potential rather than just my grades. But quickly, in my first semester, my grades did catch up with me, and I finished my freshman first semester with, I think, a 1.25 GPA. I was told that I wouldn't be welcomed back if I didn't bring my grades up. It didn't meet the retention criteria. So I really struggled, applied that energy again, and squeaked by. It was sophomore year that changed everything. So I took a course with Dr. Levy in the psych department. It was drugs and behavior. And he was talking about the sort of paradoxical effect of stimulant drugs in people with ADHD, and how when you give a stimulant to someone with ADHD, it actually improves focus. He basically said, if you want someone with ADHD to learn complex math, put them on a roller coaster and maybe they'll get it. And it just resonated with me. And I spoke with him after. He set me up with resources, and I gut screened, and it was a slam dunk. I mean, for the first time in my life, it was, this is not your fault. There's something bigger than you. So I finished owu my last semester with a 3.5 GPA, which was really huge for me, and was redemptive. And I poured myself right into the workplace. Started out as an administrative assistant, and 12 years later became a CEO. And what I learned through this sort of transformation that started in owu was that passion, energy, grit, enthusiasm, and ability to build and solve my own problems, and no challenge is too great, is what drives me in the workplace. And it's a great strength and skill. And it's, I'm the kind of person who builds organizations, who transforms things with potential into things with impact, because that's what I've done with myself my whole life. So for me, the takeaway is, this is sort of my special skill, because I can be vulnerable now and be my authentic self. And that strength in being who you are is really what reinforces, what you love to do and what you're good at. So I look forward to the discussion, and thanks for letting me share my story.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you for sharing your story and your vulnerability this morning. Racquel, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Racquel Harris Mason, a proud parent of Haley Mason, Ohio Wesleyan class of 2020, I don't know, 3, something like that. And I am really passionate about this topic, probably because I've been leading for a long time. And I think over my journey, I got clearer on how I wanted to lead and what was important. So I went to University of Pennsylvania, Wharton undergrad, finance major, went into banking. You know the type, the people who believe at 18 they're going to run the world, very driven, very driven. Worked in banking, went back to Northwestern for business school, went to work for Procter and Gamble. So you can imagine, I went from being an immigrant, so I moved to the United States when I was like 11 years old, to having my first job at 12. My sister was my first employee. I was making $100 in 1977 because I was such a driven person. Went to Wharton, went to banking, went to Kellogg, and was so driven to have like large impact. I was going to be a CEO and run the world and make a lot of money. And I was pretty successful. Obviously, got lots of leadership opportunities and positions, but something happened along the way. And I don't know if it was age or maturity or lots of strange life experiences, but it occurred to me probably in my late 20s, early 30s, probably as I started to have kids and got married, that leading is a privilege. And it's such an opportunity, not just to impact a result, but to impact people's lives. And the more I thought about sort of my life mission and purpose, you get all philosophical as you start to get older. And I started thinking, the work world is my mission field. Some people go off to third world countries to go volunteer, but that wasn't my calling. My calling was to make a mission field out of work. And this notion of leading with influence to me is really powerful because, to be honest, for many years, I was a leader who was effective, but maybe not like great to work with. Maybe it didn't always feel good for those people around me. And the more I realized that, I think God's put me here for a very special reason, a very special purpose, and it is to bless people, and it is to have impact. This notion of leading with influence became really important to me. And I really, over time, evolved my leadership style. And we talked a little bit yesterday, Julie and I, about this notion of, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I started recognizing that every opportunity to engage with people was one that you could make somebody's life better or worse. And to me, leading with influence is about looking for those opportunities to impact people in a really positive way, and leading not from a point of position, but from a point of influence. And the magic of that is when you have the position of power, you have a much more engaged team because you're not leading from that position of power. You're leading that from that position of, if I wasn't the executive vice president, people would probably still listen to me. So what does that mean when I am? It means I end up with a highly engaged team that's delivering great results. And more importantly, hopefully working with me as having a really positive impact on the lives of those people. So this whole notion, it sounds like, it's funny if I look at my 50-plus-year-old self versus my 20-year-old self, it feels very mushy. But I think this notion of impact doesn't have to have a consequence of people in your wake. Impact can have an incredibly positive way of blessing the lives of people around you. And to me, that's why I'm passionate about this topic of leading with influence, because I think it really can enable an organization to rise and do even more than people thought was possible when you have not just their minds, but also their hearts. So that's why I'm here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Racquel. Your passion certainly comes through in your story as well. So I appreciate that. Hilary.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here this morning next to some of these amazing women leaders. I am a recent graduate from May 2019. I majored in finance economics, and I minored in history and accounting. So after graduation, now I'm here living in New York City. I'm an equity capital markets analyst with Morgan Stanley. And I think I I'm hoping to kind of present to you sort of my perspective. Obviously in finance, it's a bit of a male-dominated working environment, and almost like a light bulb moment for me was about 2 months into my job. I was pulled aside to sit into this meeting. I had prepared the materials for it, and I was really excited to be able to sit in this boardroom with all of these highly distinguished people. And I'm sitting here with a BlackRock, high up investor, institutional investor, very important, and also the head of my department, the head of this banking department, essentially 5 other highly distinguished other men in the room, and then there's me, a 22-year-old recent college grad. And as we're sitting here, I just start to feel smaller and smaller, almost like your voice is kind of stuck in the back of your throat. And they're talking about golf, they're talking about their country club memberships. And I'm just kind of wondering, why am I here? Why am I sitting at the table in the first place? And that was a little bit of a light bulb moment for me, because in those uncomfortable situations, I feel like you can kind of shrink into your shell, which is what I did at the time. I didn't say anything. I kind of sat silent during that entire meeting. Or you can kind of realize that you're there for a reason and you're there for a purpose. And being at the table, it's up to you to really speak out and find a voice for yourself. So one thing that I'm kind of really passionate about is self-advocacy in the workplace as a young person, and hoping to kind of share that with you all today.
Thank you, Hilary. We have a number of young alumni and students with us this morning, so I think they're going to be very eager to hear how you're navigating the workplace. And Julie, you're up next.
Great. So I am a 92 alum, and I see several familiar faces, which is great from around my time, including our own Amy Prosenjack, who is not only a rock star herself, but also a sorority sister of mine. Leading by influence, I think started when I was as young as I can remember. I think that I realized early on in my life that and we were talking about this actually right before we started the panel, I think as women, we are uniquely qualified to lead through influence, because oftentimes throughout our lives, we're involved in things that don't necessarily give us direct power. And so to Racquel's point, the ability to actually lead through influence, the ability for me certainly started in high school by playing sports and being a part of social organizations back then, and certainly led a big part of my journey at Ohio Wesleyan. I was lucky enough to be a founding member of the Delta Zeta sorority, and the idea was daunting at the time to think about actually starting a new chapter at Ohio Wesleyan. My mom was a Theta. It would have been easy to just kind of join the organizations that were already there, and yet there was something inside of me that made me feel like the ability to, again, influence. I was recruitment chair for a couple of years, rush chair, and it was fun to really experience something that was hard, but also brand new at the time. I think that has been market of my path throughout my life. And so my father introduced me to Robert Frost early, and this notion of the road less traveled really was something that stuck with me. I went to Ohio Wesleyan because no one from my high school was going to Ohio Wesleyan. And so similarly, I was choosing a path. I come from a small town outside of Cleveland that I still live in, Chagrin Falls. It was nice to go somewhere where, I was going to meet all new people. Parlay that into the work world. My undergraduate major was international economics, and I thought I would come back to Cleveland and work for a large Fortune 500, Sherwin-Williams, TRW, BP, the drill, similar to Racquel. I ended up actually working for an ad agency right out of school because there was a recession going on, and ended up loving the creative process, but couldn't get fast enough back to working for a bank. And so joined a bank here in Cleveland called Society that subsequently went through my first merger with. And when I look back 28 years later, I have worked for 8 banks, but I've been hired by 4 and I've been acquired by 4. And I have been lucky enough to not only continue to lead marketing organizations and create culture. So very similar to the other stories, the ability to lead through influence has a huge place in this notion of culture. But I've been able to actually marry my passion in life with my passion at work. And so that to me, in terms of leading through influence, I'm the one that throws the surprise party. I'm at all the births, I'm at all the weddings, I'm at all the funerals. I am a moment maker. It's something that was important to me in the 90s when I was at owu, and it's important to me today. And I'm blessed to lead a marketing organization and a communications organization at Huntington that is all about making moments for each other and looking out for each other. And so I feel incredibly blessed that my career feeds me just as my personal life has fed me in all those ways. But being able to lead a lot of the integrations, bringing people together, building consensus, I think that is where women are uniquely positioned. Very similar to Hilary, I work in a very male-dominated industry, and I've been in the C-suite for a decade. And so I've sat at a lot of tables, just like Hilary. We were joking with Hilary in one of the prep sessions. We said, just learn enough about golf so that you can interject in the conversation. Just don't sit silent. Figure out how to learn about country clubs and, just always join the conversation. I think oftentimes, to Hilary's point, it's so easy to kind of shrink back into ourselves. I was joining, as a chief marketing officer when I was 39. And very similar to Amy, who's also, runs a company and did it at a very young age. There's something that's intimidating to that. There's something that's daunting. But I think the older we get, the stronger sense of self we have. We were talking, Racquel and I were talking with the students yesterday. I remember my mother saying to me once, every woman should be born 40, right? We're less critical of ourselves. We love ourselves by that point, and we surround ourselves with people that know that we're a little left of perfect, and that's okay. I probably wish I had known that at 18, 19, 20, 21 at owu, but ultimately, I think that you do forgive yourself a lot easier at 50 than you certainly did at 22. So for me, it was always about getting involved. It was always about giving back. I think, again, having parents that taught me if you have, you give, that was such an important part of my journey as well. But the ability to now sit back at my level and, to Racquel's point, make moments for others, see them reach their potential, create opportunities for them is the true blessing, and certainly what feeds me every single day. I also am blessed to have a daughter who got into Ohio Wesleyan, but she's a junior at Miami of Ohio. And so watching her grow, seeing Haley yesterday on the student panel and how articulate and how great sense of self she takes after her mama. I talked to my daughter last night and reminded her, you know, how strong and beautiful she is too. And we have a son who's a freshman at the University of Colorado out in Boulder. And so one thing that is maybe different than some of your homes is it's very quiet in mine now because I'm getting used to my empty nesting. So other than my husband who's in the other room and my wonderful yellow lab who's sleeping on my feet right now, it's a little less crazy in my house these days.
Thank you all for those wonderful introductions. We really want this to be an opportunity to kind of sit around the room together and have conversations. So as I shared at the beginning, feel free to wave your hand if you'd like to ask a question or put it in the chat function. I will get things started because I think it's a little bit of a repeating theme that we heard through all of you. Oftentimes young professionals may believe that they need a team of direct reports to be defined as a leader. And so as a young professional, what are some things that what's some advice that you would give that young professional to lead from where they are, to have a presence at the table and to have a voice that's heard?
So I will jump in on this one. I started again in high school, certainly at OWU. Volunteer organizations, nonprofit organizations, civic organizations are more than willing to let you take on leadership opportunities because they're not paying you. And so this notion of volunteerism, I certainly was taught to me by my mother. But I think that was really where I started to build that muscle memory around leading with influence. It was raising my hand and saying, yes, I'll absolutely plan that event. I will absolutely raise funds and be the fundraising chair. And certainly it went on at my time at Ohio Wesleyan. I think that you can always find opportunities to lead. And oftentimes in that nonprofit, in that civic, in that giving back, it feels good as well as doing good. And so for me, I say to my young associates all the time, get involved in your community, make a difference, make sure that you're taking on leadership opportunities, and they will give you all sorts of ability to kind of, again, build that muscle memory and figure out what your leadership style is.
I totally agree, Julie. I think getting involved is super important. And I think what you do when you get involved, whether it's at work or at school, it's important to take your work pretty seriously, right? Because the anchor of your credibility is your work. So I always love when people are spending more time networking than they are making sure that their work is done well, because at the end of the day, that is the anchor of everything. So I tell young people, first and foremost, make sure that your work is your masterpiece. And literally, you do it so well that it's a wow factor, because it doesn't matter how old you are. Doing work with a wow factor gets you a seat at the table. And all of a sudden, people are like, wait a second, tell me more about that. I think the other thing I encourage people who are newer in their careers to do, and people who are older in their careers, is don't be afraid to ask questions. Another way to lead through influence is to be curious. You'd be surprised how many questions you have as a young person that all the old people have, but no one's going to ask because they're afraid of looking silly. And when you can honestly be like, hey, does that make sense? It didn't make sense to anybody else in the room either. But you asking the question is a fantastic way to lead, especially when you ask it in a really positive, hey, I'm just trying to understand. So I think thinking about ways that as you jump into, whether it's the volunteer opportunities, as Julie said, or you're new in your role, finding ways to engage, because leadership doesn't have to be, I'm in charge of the project and all the people. Leadership can be leading the thinking, leadership can be leading a particular piece. And the important part is that you're focusing on your impact, and your impact can be made in a number of places. And the last piece I would add is, as you're focusing on your work, as you're asking good questions, as you're volunteering for opportunities, I always tell people, and Haley's probably tired of me saying this, as you do anything, you should really think about, if I wasn't here, what wouldn't have happened? Like literally, when if I'm not in a room, I want there to be a gaping hole, right? Like what is the impact that happened just because I was there? And then the last piece is, just make sure you're building relationships. I know that's something that Julie and I talked a lot about yesterday. Like at the end of the day, the world is about people with hearts. It's not just about a meeting and a chart and a graph. And so especially when you're young, people want to help you. You know, we're all like, oh my gosh, it's so great to have Hilary on the panel. We all want to call every day and be like, how's your day? Tell us what happened. What can we do? So take advantage of that and build relationships and get those safe spaces so that you can really get lots of good advice, but more importantly, you'll get more opportunities to lead. Someone once said, what gets people promoted and engaged, and Julie can speak about this, is familiarity, comfort, and trust. And so by building relationships, you give people an opportunity to become familiar with you, to become comfortable with you, and to trust you. Some of the jobs I've gotten are from people who I never worked with, but because we had had some engagement on some crazy volunteer thing, all of a sudden I got a job offer. I'm like, okay, but they were familiar, they were comfortable, and they trusted me. So I'd love to hear from Amy and Hilary as well, but that would be my thoughts on what to do when you're young.
Yeah, and I agree with the power of relationships. I think that's a really strong point. I would say, ask for mentorship. I think you'd be surprised how many leaders, even at the very top, want to give back and want to pay it forward. I mean, I worked hard for my success, and it's a huge part of who I am. And I love the opportunity to pay that forward and to invest in people and help them with their self-development. It's something that brings me joy. I would also say, when you're starting out, put your ego aside. Just be hungry, but maybe not eager. So one of the things that I did getting started as an administrative assistant with no particular, duties or written description is just said, give me everything. Like, I want to get fully exposed to this world. It was a new industry for me. I had just graduated college with an English major and I went into scientific research. I said, give me papers, I'll read them. Let me edit stuff, whatever you want. I'll learn it. I'll learn it by doing. I would say don't be afraid to experiment either. And I think that a lot of people are very afraid about, if you fail, it means I'm a failure, but you learn so much out of what you don't like, as well as what you do. So try things. And really look for, I would say, the goal, the ultimate goal being finding what you love, because like we said before, when you find the things you love and it's a natural fit for you, things just go very smoothly and it just works out. When you find yourself forcing yourself into a framework that you think is the right life that you're supposed to have, you see a lot of bumps in the road, and I think it leads to a lot of lack of fulfillment.
I'll jump in here too. This is something I think about all the time. Obviously, I'm now a second year analyst, but that's essentially at the bottom of the totem pole of this organization that I work for, that can be pretty hierarchical in nature. So every day I'm kind of trying to think, how can I be a value add? What's one thing that would really, really help my manager? Would it be pulling some different research on a company he's speaking to next week? Would it be just essentially making sure he's up to date on all the meetings on his calendar? I'm just really kind of trying to think, okay, in my role, what's something that can kind of just like make me more valuable to the team in the first place? And that's something that I'm trying to do all the time. But I'd also go to the idea of relationships and just like meeting people, not only in your workplace, but maybe like outside of your department. One thing that was really stressed to me during some of my internships at Morgan Stanley was the fact that people really aren't going to say no to talking to you. Everyone was essentially in your shoes at one point. So just kind of like raising your hand and saying, I'm just curious about how you got here. What are some things that you really like about your role? Kind of just facilitating a conversation in the first place. I think that gets you really far. And then I also just kind of close by saying it's really important for young people to bring their authentic selves to the workplace. That's one thing that I'm constantly trying to work on is these people that you're working with and spending so much time, they're human beings just like you. So it's important that you're not kind of like this cookie cutter like work person that they just kind of associate with, okay, this person does their task well, and then that's it. I think it's important if you can kind of bring like a well-rounded sense of yourself and like kind of appeal to someone as another human being, ask about their family, ask about other things that like you think are going to resonate with them, and then they'll also kind of see you as this person with a sense of self.
Thank you all. We have a couple of questions coming in the chat function, and one, there's two that are a little bit related and go back to relationships. So Yes, building positive relationships are very important, but how do you navigate the relationships when folks are not necessarily supportive of you? So the one question is, as a leader, how do you deal with a male bully who feels he's always right? Doesn't have to be a man. So the other question is, when you still haven't become a leader and on track to be one, how do you handle women that aren't supportive of you to become a leader as well? So how do you navigate those tricky situations when you've got some roadblocks in your path?
Well, I'll start off because I want to learn from the wisdom of my panelists. So I'll speak quickly and then listen. I think first and foremost, the reason why it's great to build relationships is because you can get other perspectives on people. So I recently joined a new company, and there's some, it's an all male board, and there's some interesting personalities. And before taking on somebody, my first question was to talk to some of those people I built relationships with and just get perspective on, hey, what works with that person, what doesn't work with that person. Don't let yourself walk into a wall if someone can save you from walking into the wall. So I would advise you to get perspective. And I think it's all so situational. There's not one answer to that. Is a male bully your peer, your boss? You know, the answer is completely different. I will say cowering to bullies is rarely a good strategy, whether it's on the playground or in the boardroom. And that doesn't mean punching the bully back, but it does mean being clear about your facts, your data, your point of view, being unemotional and not being willing to roll around in the mud and just stick with the facts. Somebody said to me once, you know, it's not about being emotional. It's respond, do not react, and respond with the facts and data to keep you on track with that, I think is really important. But I want to emphasize that how you do it is really situational, because in my situation, I felt very comfortable just saying, you know what, enough. I could do that. I'm an executive vice president. He's an executive vice president. I'm not sure I would have done that if I was a junior ABM at Procter & Gamble and he was the CEO, right? So I think everything is situational. But in terms of the women piece and women not being supportive, what did somebody say? There's a special place in a bad place for women who don't support other women. And I would tell you, there's so many wonderful people in the world. Do not allow negative people, whether it's a bully or a woman who doesn't support you, to sap your energy. I mean, I almost say you got to put on blinders at some point and yes, they're there, and walk away from them. You're not trying to convince them to get on your side. I doubt there's one person who's in charge of your entire career future. So I would say always behave in a way that you're proud of, and always be kind, but give negative people in your life limited energy. Do not invest it in those places where you get nothing back, and focus on the places where you can have support and where you can be treated properly. But I'd love to hear from the other panelists.
Well, I would add too that I think that in my experience, there typically is a reason why someone is negative. They probably have had some kind of either negative life experience, or they're naturally incredibly insecure. And so I couldn't agree with Racquel more. You know, surround yourself with positive people, surround yourself with people that lift you up, surround yourself with people that make you better. And remind you of the greatness of yourself. But I would also say that I've had both situations, you know, on the male side as well as on the female side. And I am one of those people that just loves to kind of figure out why people are the way they are. Part of Racquel and Mai's business is organizational behavior and culture, as much as it is marketing, right? There's a science behind what we do, and then there's this art piece of it too. And so for me, because I have been through so many integrations and I've joined new executive teams as the new person, and all of them have been through relationships, as the other have said. So I typically know the person at the top and then ultimately have to figure out the rest. I do think that there's something about giving someone space and trying to understand why you're getting this negative energy, right? Not spending too much time, but I found both with a woman in particular, as I entered a new organization, all it took was actually sitting down with her and getting to know her and finding out that she actually sat at the same executive table and didn't feel heard. And she felt crowded by me. I have kind of a big personality. And so ultimately I joined the table and she's like, oh my gosh, now I'm going to have even less time to talk. Right. Well, once I actually just sat down and had a conversation with her and really kind of ferreted out the fact that maybe she was a little threatened by me, or she was threatened by the opportunity that she was going to get less airtime, even less airtime. We're now fast friends, right? Because I took the time to put myself in her shoes and understand what her insecurities were and what the challenges were. And I actually think that on the male side, it's even easier because oftentimes men just are impatient or they feel like they don't have time to deal with you. And like Hilary, if you actually are somebody who is really good at what you do and goes above and beyond, oftentimes that fades away with men. They tend to just really look for somebody that's going to help them. And if you go above and beyond, which we all do as women every single day, because that's how we're built, other duties as assigned, I say almost every day, I think ultimately you can overcome even the worst. But I couldn't agree with Racquel more. We were saying yesterday we were separated at birth. I believe that. If you try to get to know somebody and actually meet them on their level and put yourself in their shoes, and it doesn't work unless you have to deal with them on a regular basis. Just limit the amount of energy that you give them. Couldn't agree with that more. But I do find that most people have a story and most people have a reason. And if you take the extra time to get to know that story and that journey and that reason, oftentimes it resolves itself.
Yeah, I would agree. I think these are both really great points. And, one thing is when you speak from what you believe in, it's not hard. And Covey's 7 Habits talks a little bit about that, talks about, speaking from your values. And I think that's very true. When you get into catty arguments, when you get into defending yourself, when somebody puts you on the defense, which has happened to all of us, you feel bad after. You walk away feeling like, my God, I really don't like that I did that I went there. But when you speak from your values and your conviction, you feel good after, even if you don't agree with the person. So I think it's a reality, unfortunately, in the workplace that, especially I think with women in my experience, that there can be that competitiveness and that there can be some defensiveness, and people do often feel threatened. I've experienced similar things to you, Julie. I mean, we're all big personalities. We show up in a room, and some women don't like competing for the space. So that's one piece of advice. Another thing is some words of wisdom from a good management book, Getting to Yes, which talks about interest-based negotiation. So that's something that I was kind of doing and didn't know that there was a term for it until I read this book. Understanding what's going on underneath the surface. This has been very successful with me, especially with men, with difficult and maybe emotional men who don't feel that they're emotional. Why are we arguing? What's the fear? What's the stress? What's the anger? What's really behind it? And you don't always have to ask those questions because that might put someone on the defense too, but just being logical and rational and talking it out instead of letting that anger trigger you and, drag you down into that place where you just feel like you're butting heads. And then the last thing that I think of sometimes, I've sort of developed this mantra for myself, because I think the reality is these points are great from us. And I want to hear from Hilary as well, since she's newer to the workplace, but these are great points for us because we've been through a lot and we've kind of made it in our careers, and we can look back and say things like surround ourselves with great people. We have the luxury of being able to build our own teams. When you're starting out, you don't. So the mantra that I've been developing for myself lately for things I can't control and, just stresses in life is bigger than this moment. And I'll go out on walks and I'll just kind of deep breathe and I'll just say to myself, life is bigger than this moment. This is a moment in time. Everything passes. It feels like the world right now. A week, a day, an hour from now, it's gone.
I love that you said that, because one thing that I've been trying to incorporate into my workday is taking a step back and going for walks and just kind of like getting a breath of fresh air and kind of just like understanding maybe if I'm upset and I'm going on this walk, what happened? Why did it upset me? As a junior person kind of dealing with these situations, it's pretty intimidating because you really can't always say like, no, I don't think that's fair what you're saying. I don't really also have that perspective. Whenever I'm in a situation, which hasn't been often, but in my experience, I really do try to go back to the facts, because as an analyst, I'm closest to the numbers and the facts. And I'm like, I understand that you're thinking about things from this perspective, but these are the facts that I'm working with, and this is why I've come to the conclusion that I've come to. I also feel like a lot of people, when they are acting as a bully, they just want to be heard, and sometimes they're lashing out because they're not being heard in a certain situation. So it's not like I can really call them out on these actions, but I try to approach it as another human and kind of like understanding what they're trying to come across with, why they feel like they're not being heard. I try to kind of like meet them halfway. I don't often deal with this kind of behavior, but it is a little bit more intimidating from as a junior person.
Thank you all. Certainly the active listening and coming from a place of trying to understand the other person is key to all of that. Another question that came in is asking, what are the ways that you show other colleagues or employees that they are seen and heard and valued?
So I am in a emerging leader mentor. I'm a mentor for several colleagues at Huntington, and part of the curriculum that we actually learned about, which I thought was completely crazy, I will admit, is called Inside Out Coaching. And it really, I can remember we were doing this pre-session with the executives and the educator, and she was saying, so when a colleague comes to you with a problem, how do you approach it? And I said, well, this is an easy one. If I've been through the same thing before, I just simply tell them exactly how I would handle it. And I really speed up the process, right? I make it really easy for them because I have the answer, and I just let them know what the answer is. And then they get to avoid what I went through. And she went, totally wrong. And I said, what do you mean? I'm trying to make people's lives easier. And she said, no, you're there to help and encourage and allow them to come up with the solution themselves. And you might actually find out that they might come up with a better solution than the way you handled it. And I just thought that was crazy, but kidding. It was amazing that if you simply give people space and you give them support, I find oftentimes that's where they actually rise to levels far above what they believed they were capable of. And oftentimes that's the best recognition that you can give somebody. I mean, we can promote people, we can give them a title, you can give people more money, you can give them a shout out, you can do recognition. But I think if you are the type of leader that actually provides space for the people around you to achieve success far beyond what they believed they were capable of, and you create the environment and you create the ingredients that maybe were helpful to you to become successful, it's setting the stage for them to do it themselves. And I would suggest for those moms on the call today, it is the hardest thing we do, because it would be just so easy for me to tell Aubrey exactly how I got here and just follow right along. Well, it's not going to happen that way for her, right? She's going to have a different path than I did. I have a different path than my mother did. And the blessing and the joy is to create, in my world, has been to create space for people to be successful and to give them the ingredients and the environment, but not to try to do it for them.
I love that, Julie. I totally think teach a man to fish, don't just give him the fish, right? Let him figure it out. I know the other thing that I've really been focusing on, especially in 2020, which has just been a tough year, is looking for positive and commenting on it. Like I have a thing where 10 times a day I have to notice something great about people I work with. Whether it's when I flew up to Indianapolis a few weeks ago and the lady who helped me with the copier and sending her back, I didn't send her a bouquet of flowers. I just sent her back an email that was like, hey, you took time out and I really appreciate you. Or the lady, who was making the food, or the person who did a really good presentation. I think it is so important for us as a human race to start to be more intentionally kind and to start to look for ways to intentionally just lift people up and say, I see you and you're special and you're great. And so the other things I try to do is just to find ways to say thank you to people. And I even did it at an early age with people more senior than me. And I remember I just left a 14-year career with the Coca-Cola company. And I remember at the beginning of my 14 years, the CEO did something really cool. And I sent him a note. And it wasn't a suck-up note. I was genuinely like, I'm so impressed with what you just did with this for these reasons. And he said, Racquel, in my job, nobody ever tells me I'm doing a good job. Nobody thinks I need reinforcement. He goes, honestly, it's the most lonely and depressing job. And he said, would you mind having lunch with me? I'd like to talk more about your ideas. Because of course I had an idea for improvement. I'd like to talk more about like what you said and what you want to do. And it just struck me that, gosh, who would think he would have needed encouragement? And you never know when the note you send or the smile you give somebody is going to make a difference. And I just would encourage all of us now more than ever to just look for those opportunities to say, great, I see you and you're awesome.
Yeah, that's really great. And building off of both of those themes, I've experienced in my rapid career growth, as employees and as managers, we are often measured through our output. How much work did we get done? What was the impact of our work? How many deals did we bring in? How successful did we, achieve this goal, whatever it may be. As leaders, it's our job to get things accomplished through others. And that's really, investing, making that transition from our output being our own product, our work product, to our output being how effectively we built a culture, how much our employees want to work here, how productive our employees are because we've built a culture and a place that has the resources and the support to get things done. So we have a lot of team meetings. I rebuilt a culture at my current organization, basically from scratch and completely turned it around. And, some of the things we do, we have team meetings together and we talk about the same sorts of things. We reinforce the same points over and over. One of the things that we do a lot of is what Julie mentioned, which is me resisting the urge to do all the talking, stepping back and realizing that my role is being a facilitator and making this a safe environment where people have a voice to solve their own problems. If I'm telling people what to do, it may or may not stick. They might resent me. They might leave the organization. They might just not do it. I might be completely off base about the solution that I thought was going to work for the problem. People who do the work get what the problem is and often can innovate the best solutions. They just often haven't been asked. So I try to create that environment where, it's not me making suggestions, and that's tough because I'm a problem solver. But it's not me; it's the team. And to talk about, look, it's okay that we make mistakes. Let's welcome mistakes because we're learning from them. I like to share with the team when I make mistakes to also lead by example and just, show them that I mean what I say. And, plus we can all learn from it. So I think really it does come down to building that culture.
From my perspective, I do think that it kind of comes from me wanting to support the other junior people that I work with. Whether it's kind of just like shooting them a note. I think this was awesome that you spoke up in this meeting. Just because we're kind of each other's biggest cheerleaders. So feeling like you're supported by your peers is really important to me. And I'm trying to kind of have everyone else that I work with also do that. I work in an industry that's really competitive. And right now, towards the end of our second year, we have to kind of decide, do we want to stick with the bank? Do we want to go to a different division of the bank? And there's kind of like this heightened sense of competition. But I'm trying to kind of like set that aside and understand that we all are kind of yearning and working towards something, but to be mindful and really like lift up the people around me so we don't feel this competitive nature all the time.
That's awesome, Hilary. I have one build, Amy, on what you said, and that is, I loved when you just closed out, Amy, talking about not being necessarily private about failures or challenges, because I feel like as women, we are so over-programmed, and we talk about burnout. I just wrote an article about this, so I could send it to you guys, but we're so over-programmed to be perfect, and we think leadership is perfect, and I'm always perfect, and I think another part of leading with influence is being human and being imperfect and being public about our learning opportunities. Whether you want to call it failure depends on your environment, but I think, Amy, what you said about like being able to grow as a leader is not about being perfect, but it's about using every opportunity as a learning opportunity to get better, whether it's for the organization or for you personally. But I think being public about that is a really important part, because nobody wants to follow a perfect leader who's inhuman, right? Like, oh, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to follow Julie and Amy and Hilary. Like, they're cool people, right? Because they're, what did you say, Julie? You said some funny way. You said, we understand that we're just imperfect. And I think that's such a critical part of leadership and self-management, because if you try to be perfect at home, at work, with your kids, with everything, you are going to burn out. You can't. And so allow yourself to be human in the process of your leadership journey, whatever that is.
And I do think it actually inspires people, because the younger you are, the more perfect you think you need to be. Luckily, Racquel and I in particular have gotten to an age where we are completely comfortable with not being perfect, right? We embrace our failures, but I think, which comes with age typically. But I completely agree with that. I think that the more that you can be human, the more that you can share your life stories, the more that you can share your mistakes and the times that things have been tough. I actually find that that's empowering and inspiring, especially to young people who just believe that if we've gotten to this level, we must have done everything right. And it just is not the case. And like everyone says, you learn way more from your failures than you do from your successes. And they are mobilizing and energizing and filling in so many ways. And I think that the more that we can encourage, especially young women in particular, because men don't worry about being perfect. It's kind of amazing to me. They never even think about it. And so I think that the more that we can encourage that imperfectness at a younger age, and we talked about this a lot with the students yesterday, this notion of experimentation, this notion of facing your fears. I shared my daughter a couple of weeks ago, called me the night before she had decided that she was going to jump out of a plane. And that she was going to go skydiving. And I am, first of all, her mother, and second of all, terrified of heights. So the idea of both of those things, all I wanted to do was drive to Oxford, Ohio and say, you can absolutely not jump out of the plane, Aubrey May Tutkovics. But sure enough, she jumped out of the plane and called the next day. And I was asking questions like, how high was the plane? It was 10,000 feet. And she said, Mom, I got to the edge there and this guy strapped to my back, and I was never more scared in my life. And a second later, I was never happier. I was never more joyful as I saw this amazing expanse of Southern Ohio below me. And I remember thinking, thank the Lord I did not take that opportunity away from her by being an overbearing mother to a almost 21-year-old. But more importantly, isn't that life? Isn't oftentimes it about bracing at that last minute when we're so afraid of something, and then jumping and finding joy on the other side that you never dreamed was possible? And I think so much of what we as women do is we hold ourselves back at the edge of the plane and we don't jump. And it is the jump in life that is the part that brings the joy on the other side.
That's hard to top, Julie. I don't know if we have about 5 minutes left, and I almost want to just like capstone it right there. I will say we have a couple of questions in the chat function that we're just not going to have time for. One is about burnout, and I think Racquel, we can share your article that you just mentioned. We can share some of the other articles, Amy, and the books that you have shared as well. We can send that out to the group. But in the 5 minutes that we have left, maybe just some closing thoughts from each of you. Hilary, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. So kind of these 3 takeaways that I think that I have in terms of leading by influence and what it means to be an authentic leader. I mentioned at the beginning, self-advocacy, that's huge. You have to speak up for yourself. You're given a voice, you're given a seat at the table for a reason. So I'm really, every day I try to think of like, how can I use my voice? How can I advocate for myself? And as a more junior person, that's intimidating, but once you do it, you feel so much better and that you spoke up in the first place. I'd also say like understanding what internally versus externally motivates you is something that I'm really trying to think of in terms of like my next career decision, where I want to go, what I want to do. It's not really about the title for me or the firm. It's really about the work I do is important and it's respected. And finally, just to be your authentic self and bring yourself to the workplace.
So we talked a little bit in one of the prep sessions about the notion of fake it till you make it. And there are mixed feelings about fake it till you make it. But one thing I really like is in Amy Cuddy's presence, she actually redefines that as fake it till you become it. I like that a lot more because I feel like in many ways, this is how I've driven my life. You know, getting out there and doing things, even though I have this self-doubt, even though, you know, I couldn't perform in various settings before I learned about my diagnosis, showing up and being present in the room and just, you know, getting through it with strength. And you know what? The world doesn't know that you're feeling the way you are inside. You show up and you show the world what you show them. What you have inside, you know, the fear, the angst, the insecurities, we all have it. But it doesn't have to hold you back. I think that when you can embrace that and you can just keep working on that development and just try it as almost like thinking of it as a muscle exercise, you can gain strength and ability to, as they say, become it. So that's one of my takeaways. Another one is it's funny that I'm recommending books because I am not a reader, but I am a fan of audiobooks and everything's on audiobook now. So the other really seminal book that I appreciate very much and would recommend to everyone is Carol Dweck's Mindset. So this talks about the notion of fixed and growth learning. And it wasn't until I found out about this book only maybe 3 years ago that I realized that somebody had actually made a study and given a name to what I went through, growth learning, and that there's strength and power in that. So again, the ability to make mistakes and to rebuild out of those mistakes is what really can help us to develop our successes and build ourselves. And then the other thing is in terms of resources, there's so many great resources out there. But one of the podcasts that I like listening to is Dear HBR. It's Harvard Business Review. It's something that they put out as a side piece to their publication. And it's just really fun to listen to because people call in with work challenges and they have a panel of experts that address their opinions on how to resolve things. And I love to listen and like kind of comment, do I agree? Would I do it this way? Would I not do it this way? But I also love to get advice. You know, we're always learning. We're always capable of learning and should always be open to that. No matter how successful or accomplished we are, I think it's important that we're always open to self-development.
Awesome. I'll let Julie close, so I'll do my quick three. One, I think, focus on advancing the mission of the enterprise, never focus on advancing yourself. If you're focusing on advancing yourself, I think you got to look in the mirror and say, would I want to follow somebody that's what they were concerned about? Number two, expect and lean into discomfort. Don't make you go into the fetal position. Be like Julie's daughter at the edge of the plane and just jump into it, because there's real beauty on the other side of that, and there's real learning on the other side of that. And last but not least, be kind to yourself. We as women are our own worst critics. And if I could go back and change one thing about my life, it would be I would have been kinder to the younger Racquel instead of being so hard on her. Because at the end of the day, you really have to own and be grateful for the process and the journey that you're on. So Jules.
Last but not least, embrace, right? I can remember being at OWU and just absolutely loving the notion of carpe diem, right? Life is too short. I think if we've learned anything during this pandemic, it is making the most of moments. There have been incredible things, and I've learned we talked about this with the students yesterday, I have learned from my children a level of resilience during this pandemic that I had never seen. You know, our son missed out on the second half of his senior year of high school. That would have been crushing to me had that happened when I think of all the fun I had. He's, you know, a freshman in college. It's a very different experience than it certainly was at my time at Ohio Wesleyan. And the same for our daughter. They just are finding ways to be resilient and to embrace life. And I think that is something that everything happens for a reason. And I do believe you will someday find that reason, but just lean into life now and enjoy every single second. And I think also, to Racquel's point, never has it been a better time to just simply be kind to one another. You can literally make somebody's day. Part of what drives me crazy about having a mask is that I smile constantly, and you know, like Racquel, my smile lights up my face, and I literally oftentimes will see someone that looks a little sad on the street, and I want to pull down my mask and just simply smile and then put it back up. But I think that we have the ability to be kind to one another right now. We all need it. You never know the day that somebody's having and what a smile can do. And I think that so often it is the positivity in life that is the most life-changing and the most meaningful. So if you can be anything, as they say, be kind.
Thank you all. This has been a wonderful morning. Great opportunity for us to hear from each of you, your experiences, your wisdom, your humility. So thank you, thank you. You're welcome to share a little bit in the chat box. We are running a few minutes over time, but feel free to stick around and give some shout outs to your fellow alumni. Also, I'll remind you that we are going to start a WOW speaker series in January to supplement some of the conversations that we have had this weekend. I think we could have stayed here for all day and continued this conversation. So we're looking forward to being able to do that in the new year. So again, thank you for joining us this morning. Feel free to reach out to us, give us any feedback on how you might suggest improving upon these programs. And we look forward to seeing you in about 15 minutes. Thank you.